All right, guys. So we are going to start off with our new part of the poem. Okay? So, up at the very top, we've got part of our poem about integers from yesterday. And then we are going to continue and fill in some new blanks in our poem. Okay? So, again, today we're going to be using Mr. Numberline to find opposites and absolute values. So, we're starting with our integer poetry. It started off with, can you put them all in order, plot the points? And we just might, because the number that is greater is the number on the right. Opposites are easy. Just switch the sign or go the same distance on the far side of Mr. Number line. So when we're talking about opposites, we are talking about on the other side. Remember yesterday we talked about how on Mr. Numberline he's positive half the time and negative the other half of the time, and it's surrounded by 0 or the origin. So when we're talking about switching, it's going to the opposite location. So here is example 1. It says, what is the opposite integer? What is the opposite of the integer 5? So step 1, we know that 5 is 5 units to the right of the origin because it is positive. So we're going to start at the origin and we're going to move how many units? 5 in the opposite direction, which lands us at negative 5. So the opposite of 5 is negative 5. Notice that they like to write numbers using parentheses. Look right here where it says we write it like this. That's not needed. That's the same thing as just saying negative 5. Okay, but when it has it in parentheses, the way you would read it in words is the opposite. That line means the opposite of 5. So the opposite of 5 would be written in that parenthesis with the negative or opposite sign on the outside of the parentheses. Okay? What about if we have an opposite of a negative integer? So example 2 says, what's the opposite of the integer negative 6? Are we still going to start at the origin? Yes. Negative 6 is 6 units to the left in the negative direction, which means we're going to start at the origin and go 6 to the right, which will land us at positive 6. So the opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. Now notice how we write this in words. When we are asking for the opposite of a negative. Ready? Opposite of negative 6. One way that I personally remember it is that, which is not that I like to say in behavior, but 2 negatives make a positive in this circumstance. The opposite of a negative will get you to a positive. No, it does not mean 2 wrongs make a right. There is a difference. Remember, I said negative and positives. So, the opposite of negative 6, again, is positive 6. Try A through E. Try A through E below. Alrighty, so now that we have done those practices, let's go down to the other key points to remember about opposites. Are you ready? Number 1, the sum of a number and its opposite is always 0. If you were to add them up, you would get to 0. There's only one integer whose opposite is equal to itself. What's that integer? 0. Finding the opposite of an integer should not be confused with flipping the integer over. The opposite of the integer 5 is not 1/5. What is that called? When we do the reciprocal, what's that called? Reciprocal. RECIPROCAL. That's called the reciprocal. When you multiply reciprocals together, what should you get as your product? When you multiply reciprocals together, you get 1. 5 times 1/5, 5 over 5 equals 1. Here's the difference when you are adding your opposites. All right, so now we are going to move over to learning about absolute values. So we're going to go over our poetry that we've done so far, and then we're going to use Mr. Numberline to find absolute values. Are we ready? Awesome. Can we put them all in order, plot the points? And we just might, because the number that is greater is the number to the right. Opposites are easy, just switch the sign or go on the same direction on the far side of Mr. Numberline. An absolute value is happy. It feels like a hero because it's the positive.
This is from the 0.
Positive distance of the number from 0.
Can it be like -0?
It cannot be. 0 can never be negative. So it's the basically it's distance. Distance is always positive. You are always moving somewhere. Okay? So, example 1. What is the absolute value of the integer 6? Well, if I start at the origin and I go to 6, I have moved a distance of 6. That's it. So the positive distance of the integer 0 from the origin is 6. Of the integer 6 from the origin is 6. So the absolute value of 6 is 6. Now notice what the absolute value signs are. Let's look down below. Absolute value sign. It's these 2 lines. When 2 straight lines contain a number, or it can also contain operations. It can have an operation in there and have an absolute value sign on the outside of the operation. So, absolute value of 6 is, again, 6. Let's look at when we've got a negative. We are still looking for the positive distance. I'm just going to put a plus sign. The positive distance of the integer -6 from 0. What's that distance? It's 6. Even though it goes in the negative direction, the distance is not negative. The distance is a distance of 6, right? It is impossible for a distance in this circumstance to be negative. Yes.
The absolute value is how many spaces away it is from 0.
Exactly. Absolute value is how many spaces away it is from 0. It doesn't matter which direction. It just matters the distance. So the absolute value of -6 is 6. We write it. Let's fill in the lines down below. They forgot the lines. Absolute value of -6 is 6. Go ahead and try A through E. What did you guys notice about letter E?
Oh, okay. It's still negative.
Why is it still negative? What's it asking for, Krisha? It's got the opposite sign on the outside of the absolute value sign. So step 1 would be finding the absolute value of -1, which is +1. Step 2 would be finding the opposite of that, which is -1. So let's look at these points to remember. Unlike opposites, which can be negative or positive, absolute values are always positive. For all negative integers, the absolute value equals the opposite. of the integer. Is that true for positive integers? No, because it's itself, right? It's not its opposite. For all non-negative integers, the absolute value of the integer equals itself. Mm-hmm.